Let's introduce a really interesting topic which talks about the Phillips curve. So in the 1950s, A.W. Phillips, he was an economist at the London School of Economics. He actually was looking at Keynesian's idea. And what he found was, after looking at 60 years worth of British data, that Keynes was onto something. Dr. Phillips did find a correlation between unemployment and inflation. And what he found is that if one is higher, the other one is going to be lower. So there is this trade-off between unemployment and inflation. When this is happening, we call this the Phillips curve. So on the right here, we do have an example of the Phillips curve, which is basically showing you where your economy is currently at. So for example, if you looked up like, hey, what's the inflation unemployment right now? And it said, hey, you're at 5% inflation, 4% unemployment, that would be at point A. If you were to look at it later and say, okay, if the government tried to reduce inflation to 2%, what would unemployment be? And so we would find out point B would be pretty close to your current inflation and unemployment. And what that means is that if inflation is going to be lower, unemployment is going to be higher. Inflation lower, unemployment higher. Okay, so if we're at point A, which is where you currently are, and if the government's like, hey, I want to reduce inflation, the economy is like, okay, fine, if you want to reduce inflation, we do have to have higher unemployment. That's just the way it is. So that's what Dr. Phillips really looked at. He was like, oh, hey, because unemployment's higher, we could have lower inflation. But if inflation is going to be higher, we're going to have lower unemployment. So they are related. There's a trade-off there. So with this being said, the government really had to make a choice. Okay, do we have a change in aggregate demand, which is going to change the supply, which is going to change the unemployment and inflation, right? So it's like, if I wanted to reduce unemployment, I do have higher inflation. But if I wanted to reduce the inflation, I have higher unemployment. And so with this new graph here, the Phillips curve, we now had to basically pick, what do we want to do? And so Keynesian macroeconomics argues that the solution to a recession is, in the sense of fighting unemployment and inflation, is to do expansionary and fiscal policy. We're going to be talking more about these in depth in another chapter, but the basic idea here is that we're looking at government spending and taxes. So basically, an expansionary fiscal policy is just looking at, hey, if I were to decrease taxes or increase spending, this is going to increase aggregate demand, and because aggregate demand is increasing, we can get back to full employment output. The other option was the contractionary fiscal policy, which talked about decreasing spending or increasing taxes, and that would decrease aggregate demand. So when the economy is operating above potential GDP, the unemployment is low because you're having a lot of output, you need a lot of people working, so your unemployment is low, but as the Phillips curve shows, lower unemployment, the higher inflation. And so the Keynesian response would be to do contractionary fiscal policy. So right now your aggregate demand is too high. So you need to decrease your aggregate demand. And the only way to do that is to increase taxes or decrease government spending. And this would shift the aggregate demand to the left, which would decrease it back to potential. The result would be a downward pressure on price level, very little reduction in output, and then your unemployment would rise a little bit, but not too much. So like I said, we'll talk more about fiscal policy in another chapter. We'll talk more about the ins and outs of that. So let's talk about shifts and movements in the Phillips curve, because we did see this in the sense of aggregate demand, right? So like, for instance, if we increase government spending, so G goes up, what happens to aggregate demand? Well, aggregate demand is C, I, G, and NX. So if we increase government spending, that's going to increase here, which increases aggregate demand. So aggregate demand will go up. So if we were on our graph here, and we were in a recessionary gap, so YF, and this is your current, and we were to increase government spending, this would increase the aggregate demand. Okay. So what happened to price level? Well, prices would go up on it, and then output would go up as well. So price level up, output up. If price level is higher, that means inflation is higher. And if output is higher, you need more people working, so unemployment could go down. And so what this means for the Phillips curve is this. Let me move it down here. So what this means for the Phillips curve is, let's say you were at point A. Right? And then you got put at point B. So we have that going on in the economy, and then we can also show you what inflation and unemployment is at these points. So if you were to go to Fred and look up the inflation and unemployment, then you could see that at point A, you would have, let's say, 3% inflation, 5% unemployment. So these are hypothetical numbers. This is point A. But because government spending increases, this increases aggregate demand, increases price level, increases output, which increases inflation and decreases unemployment. So because this happens, that happens. So therefore, we're looking here. Inflation higher, unemployment lower. Okay, so inflation is going to go higher, and unemployment's going to go lower. Okay, so let's draw that. Inflation is going to go higher, and unemployment's going to go lower. So that'll be point B. And so if you were to look this up, you might see 2% unemployment and 6% inflation. So sure enough, inflation goes up and unemployment goes down. So as you can see here, when there was a shift up in the aggregate demand, this caused a movement on the Phillips curve. Let's look at a change in the investment spending. So if investment goes down, aggregate demand goes down. If we were to look at the graph here, and you were to decrease investment spending, okay, you would see that prices go down, output goes down. So that means inflation goes down, unemployment goes up. You need less people working, you fire people, unemployment's higher. So therefore, if you were at point A here, and then you move, or I'm sorry, if you were at point A here, and then you move to point B here, it would look something like this. You would have inflation, unemployment, point A, 3%, 5%. Inflation is going to be lower, unemployment is going to be higher, so this would be point B. So now you have 1% inflation and 7% unemployment. Don't worry about like where am I getting 1 and 7%. Focus on the fact that inflation is going to be lower, so anything lower than 3, unemployment is going to be higher, so anything more than 5. So that's how the Phillips curve works with a change in demand. A change in demand causes a movement on the Phillips curve. Okay. Let's look at a change in supply. So if we were to change supply, such as maybe to the left, as we can see here, you were here at A, but then after the change in supply, you're here at B. So price level goes from here, goes here, so price level goes up. Output was here, but now it's here, so output goes down. If price level is higher, that means inflation is higher. If output is down, you need less people working, more unemployment. Well, that's interesting. Earlier we said it was a trade-off, but now they're moving in the same direction. So now let's look at the Phillips curve. So now if we're looking at the Phillips curve, inflation, unemployment, you're at point A. We now have higher inflation and higher unemployment. This sounds like stagflation. Stagflation, higher inflation, higher unemployment. So therefore, we want higher inflation and higher unemployment. So now we're going to go here. So now that puts us here at point B. So what does this mean for the Phillips curve? That would have to mean you shifted the Phillips curve. Okay. So when we change the short run average supply curve, so a shift in the short run average supply curve will shift the Phillips curve. So let's talk about that. If we were to increase the short run average supply curve, so we were to go here, we were to increase it, we would see prices go down, output goes up, so price level down, output goes up, inflation goes down, unemployment goes down. So therefore, if we looked at the Phillips curve, it would be inflation, unemployment, we would point A, and then after the changes where it's lower inflation, lower unemployment, that puts us at point B. We shifted the Phillips curve. So basically, the short run average supply curve and the Phillips curve both shift. They shift in the opposite directions. If SRAS shifts to the right, Phillips curve is going to shift to the left. SRAS shifts to the left, Phillips curve is going to shift to the right. Now, the last thing I want to talk to you about the Phillips curve is this, okay, is the long run Phillips curve. So the short run can change because we can change the aggregate demand, and that's going to change, where we're at inflation and unemployment. The long run, though, remember the long run is your natural rate of unemployment. So that is like your unemployment in the long run. Okay, so what that is going to look like is this. So your long run Phillips curve just like your long run average supply curve is a vertical line, your long run Phillips curve is going to be a vertical line as well. So therefore we have inflation, we have unemployment, we have the short run Phillips curve, and then we have the long run Phillips curve. And what the long run is telling us is this is your natural rate of unemployment. Remember, natural rate of unemployment is where you are at your full employment. Okay, if you are at your full employment, that means you are here. Your Y star is your YF. So you are at your full employment. You are at your natural rate of unemployment. So therefore, your point A, which is here, would be here. You would be at your natural rate of unemployment. If we were in a recessionary gap, such as here at point B, you would be recessionary, higher unemployment, lower inflation. So you would be here. So this would be your current unemployment and your current inflation. So notice here in this case that your U star, your current unemployment, is higher than your natural rate. When this is happening, if I gave you the Phillips curve like this, you can see that your unemployment is higher than your natural rate. This means that you do have cyclical unemployment, which means that you are in a recessionary gap. When you are not at your natural rate, you are not in equilibrium. So when we are higher than our natural rate, this means we are in a recessionary gap. When you are lower than your natural rate, this means you're in an inflationary gap. So this right here, if your point B, is to the right of the Phillips curve, this means you're in a recessionary gap. If you were to the left of it, such as point C, you have very high levels of inflation, so therefore you are in a inflationary gap. So that is the long run Phillips curve. It is a vertical line at your natural rate of unemployment. Anytime you're at your full employment, you are at your natural rate. So point A would be at your natural rate. If you are in a recessionary gap, such as point B, you have higher inflation, so you would be higher unemployment. Sorry, point B, recessionary gap, higher unemployment. So you would have a shift, you would have a movement to point B. So anytime you're to the right of your Phillips curve, this is a recessionary gap. Anytime you're to the left, you are in an inflationary gap. Okay? In the next one, we'll talk about Keynes and what he thought about the market forces. I'll see you there.